The London rain was a grimy veil, smearing the soot-stained brick of the merchant's house and matching the tempest in Alastair Finch's soul. He stood at the window of his study, a room that smelled of ledgers, ink, and the faint, desperate scent of ambition. Below, the streets of Cheapside teemed with life, a chaotic ballet of commerce that he had mastered, yet from which he now felt a world apart. "He will see you, Papa?" a soft voice asked from the doorway. Alastair turned. His daughter, Elara, stood there, a vision of quiet composure that belied the sharp intellect in her hazel eyes. At 22, she was the true architect of the Finch fortune. While he had the boldness, she had the acumen. It was Elara who had spotted the flaw in the East India shipping contracts, Elara who had diversified their holdings into the nascent railway industry, Elara whose cool head had saved them from ruin during the Panic of '37. "He will," Alastair said, his voice gravelly with anxiety. "The Duke of Ashbourne does not make social calls to Cheapside. This is about business. Our business." Elara glided into the room, her simple but exquisitely made gown of dove-grey silk whispering against the floor. "The Northern Mills consolidation," she stated, not asked. "Our offer was superior to Lord Hargrove's. The Duke, as the principal investor, would be a fool not to see it." "Dukes are not often called fools, my dear. They operate by a different set of rules, bloodlines and breeding, not balance sheets." "Then we shall have to educate him," she said, a faint, determined smile touching her lips. When the Duke was announced, the very air in the study seemed to shift. He was taller than Elara had expected, and younger. She had pictured a gout-ridden old man, but Julian Blackwood, the Duke of Ashbourne, could not have been a day over 30. His bearing was rigid, his face a mask of aristocratic hauteur carved from sharp cheekbones and a stern jaw. His eyes, the color of a winter storm, swept over the opulent but undeniably new-money room with barely concealed disdain before settling on her father. "Mr. Finch," he said, his voice a low baritone that required no volume to command attention. "Your Grace," Alastair bowed, a gesture that pained Elara to see. "This is an honor. May I present my daughter, Elara?" Julian's gaze flicked to her. He gave a curt, minimal nod. No bow. No courtesy. She was part of the furniture. Elara felt a spark of indignation, but she merely inclined her head, her expression neutral. The business was discussed with brutal efficiency. The Duke was direct, his understanding of the figures impressive. He conceded the superiority of the Finch proposal. But as the papers were laid out for signing, he did not reach for the quill. "There is, however, a complication," Julian said, steepling his long, elegant fingers. "My reputation." Alastair frowned. "Your Grace. Investing directly with a man in trade, no matter how successful, is unseemly for a man of my station. It would cause talk. Talk I cannot afford at present." Elara's spark of indignation flared into a flame. "With all due respect, Your Grace, profit is hardly unseemly. And our proposal guarantees a 20% return within the first annum." His stormy eyes met hers, and for the first time, he seemed to truly see her. There was a flicker of something, surprise, perhaps, at her directness. "Profit is one thing, Miss Finch. Association is another. My late father left the dukedom in a state of genteel impoverishment. The estate is vast, the house is crumbling, and my inheritance is tied to a single, archaic clause in his will." He paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the room. "I must marry. And I must do so before my 31st birthday, which is in 6 months' time. Only then will the entirety of the fortune be released to me." Alastair looked bewildered. I wish you luck, Your Grace, but I fail to see what this has to do with our mills." Julian's gaze remained locked on Elara. It was assessing, calculating, as if she were a horse at auction. It has everything to do with it. I need a wife who will not expect the emotional entanglements of a typical marriage. I need a business partner. A woman of sense, who understands finance and can manage the restoration of a large estate. In return, she would receive a title, a position in society, and the protection of my name for her family's enterprises. The audacity of it stole Alara's breath. She saw the plan with crystalline clarity. He was not here to invest with them. He was here to acquire her. You are proposing to my daughter? Alistair spluttered, his face turning a mottled red. I am proposing a mutually beneficial arrangement, Julian corrected, his tone devoid of all warmth. Miss Finch appears to possess a keen mind. Your business requires legitimacy, connections, doors that are currently closed to you. I require liquidity and managerial expertise. A marriage would solve both our problems quite neatly. Alara found her voice, though it was tighter than usual. And what of affection, Your Grace? What of love? A ghost of a smile, cold and humorless, touched his lips. Love, Miss Finch, is a variable I have not calculated into this equation. It is an unpredictable and often inconvenient emotion. I am offering a foundation built on logic and mutual benefit. I believe it is a far more stable construct. The insult was profound, yet it was delivered with such utter conviction that it felt like a statement of fact. She was a variable in his business plan. Her heart, her future, her very self, were simply columns in a ledger. She looked at her father, saw the desperate hope warring with paternal outrage in his eyes. This was everything he had ever wanted, a title for his daughter, a permanent foothold in the world that had always spurned him. And she looked at the Duke, handsome, cold, and offering a gilded cage. I will need to consider your proposition, Your Grace, Alara said, her voice miraculously steady. Of course, he replied, rising to his feet. Do not consider for too long. The season begins in a fortnight. I will need an answer before then. He left as abruptly as he had arrived, leaving the scent of sandalwood and entitlement in his wake. The study was silent, the only sound the relentless patter of the rain against the window. Alara, her father began, his voice pleading. Do not, Papa, she whispered, turning back to the window, watching the Duke's pristine carriage disappear into the grimy London fog. She felt the bars of her new cage already beginning to close around her. A week later, Alara stood in the overwhelming splendor of Blackwood House, the Duke's London residence. It was a palace of cold marble and ancestral portraits, their painted eyes following her every move with silent judgment. She had agreed to his terms. What choice did she have? The future of her father's business, the livelihoods of hundreds who depended on them, now hinged on this alliance. Julian received her in his private study, a room that was the antithesis of her father's. Here, leather-bound books stood in military precision, the fire burned with efficient warmth, and not a single paper lay out of place. The marriage will take place by special license in 3 days, he stated, handing her a thick sheaf of papers. This is the contract. It stipulates a generous annual allowance for you, which you may use to support your father's ventures. It also grants you full managerial authority over the Ashbourne estate accounts and its restoration. In return, you will act as the Duchess of Ashbourne in all public matters. You will host parties, you will charm my peers, you will become a pillar of society. Our private lives, however, will remain just that. Private. Alara took the contract, her fingers trembling slightly. It was all there, in black and white. Her duties, her allowances, the cold, hard facts of her new life. There was no mention of shared rooms, of children, of anything remotely resembling a marriage. It seems very thorough, she said. I believe in clarity. He walked to the window, his back to her. You will find society challenging. They will call you an upstart, a CIT, a fortune hunter. You must be prepared. I am the daughter of a man who built an empire from nothing, Your Grace. I am well acquainted with challenge. And I believe the term is parvenu. He glanced back at her, that flicker of surprise in his eyes again. Indeed. Your wit will be both your greatest asset and your most dangerous liability. I advise you to wield it carefully. The wedding was a bleak, perfunctory affair in a near-empty chapel. Elara wore a dress of silver grey, feeling like a ghost at her own funeral. Her father wept. The Duke looked as if he were finalizing a particularly tedious land acquisition. When he placed the plain gold band on her finger, his skin was cool against hers. There was no kiss. They traveled to his country seat, Ashbourne Park, in silence. The estate was every bit as magnificent and dilapidated as he had described. The house was a sprawling monument to Palladian grandeur, but the roof sagged in places, and the gardens were a wild, romantic tangle. It was here that Elara's work began. She buried herself in the estate books, and what she found was a disaster of neglect and mismanagement. Tenants were impoverished, fields lay fallow, and the debts were staggering. She worked from dawn until dusk, her mind a whirl of calculations and plans. She met with the stewards, dismissed the corrupt ones, and implemented new agricultural techniques she had read about. She negotiated with merchants, driving hard bargains that would have made her father proud. She and Julian coexisted like two opposing planets in the same solar system, their orbits occasionally intersecting over dinner. Their conversations were a series of reports and queries. The roof on the east wing requires immediate attention. I have secured a favorable price with a master craftsman from Nottingham, she would say. Proceed, he would reply, his eyes on his newspaper. The tenant farmers in the North Fields are using an outdated rotation. I have proposed a new system. The initial yield is projected to increase by 30%. As you see fit. He was always polite, always distant. He acknowledged her efficiency but seemed oblivious to the woman behind it. Elara, for her part, began to see the weight he carried. The dukedom was not a privilege to him, it was a crushing burden, a legacy of decay he was duty-bound to reverse. His coldness, she started to suspect, was a fortress wall, erected to keep the world, and his own feelings, at bay. One evening, she found him in the library, staring into the fire, a glass of brandy in his hand. He looked tired, the stern lines of his face softened by the flickering shadows. The books from the last quarter are balanced, she said softly, not wanting to startle him. We showed a profit. A small one, but a profit nonetheless. He didn't turn. My father never saw a profit in his life. He only sought his own pleasure. It was the first personal thing he had ever said to her. Elara hesitated, then stepped further into the room. It is a heavy legacy to bear. It is my birthright, he said, his voice flat. And now it is yours. I am trying to be a good steward of it. Finally, he turned to look at her. The firelight caught the silver in his stormy eyes. I know you are. You are, remarkably capable. It was the closest he had come to a compliment. A strange, warm feeling blossomed in her chest, something she quickly identified as a dangerous and entirely illogical spark of hope. The London season was a gilded battlefield, and Elara, the new Duchess of Ashbourne, was its most scrutinized soldier. As Julian had predicted, the ton was merciless. Behind fans and raised glasses, she heard the whispers. The merchant's daughter. Bought her title. How common she looks. But Elara had a weapon they did not, an unshakable sense of self-worth forged in the fires of commerce. She did not simper or try to ingratiate herself. She was polite, impeccably dressed in gowns paid for with her own allowance, and devastatingly intelligent. When Lady Jersey made a catty remark about new money, Elara smiled sweetly and replied, "Why, yes, it is so much more reliable than the old, dissipated kind, don't you find?" The remark, repeated across ballrooms, earned her a reputation for being dangerously sharp, but also, grudgingly, for being right. Julian watched her transformation with a complex mixture of awe and frustration. The business arrangement was proving more successful than he had dared hope. His creditors were being paid, his estate was healing, and his wife was holding her own against the vipers of society. But the variable he had dismissed, the human heart, was beginning to assert itself. He found himself noticing things. The way she bit her lip in concentration when reading a complex report. The way her laugh, a rare and genuine sound, lit up her whole face. The quiet grace with which she handled a distressed tenant's wife, offering practical help where empty sympathy would have sufficed. She was not the unfeeling, logical partner he had bargained for. She was vibrant, compassionate, and utterly captivating. The conflict came to a head at the summer ball at Carlton House, the most prestigious event of the season. Elara was a vision in emerald green, holding court with a group of influential bankers and politicians, discussing the Corn Laws with an insight that left them speechless. Julian felt a surge of something fierce and possessive, an emotion that felt alarmingly like pride. It was then that Lord Hargrove, the rival whose offer for the mills had been rejected, sidled up to him, his breath smelling of claret and malice. "Ashbourne, you sly dog," Hargrove slurred. "I must congratulate you. I thought you'd married beneath you, but it seems you've simply hired the most effective steward in England. A brilliant business move. Who needs a wife when you can have a glorified accountant in silk?" Rage, white-hot and blinding, swept through Julian. The cold, calculating Duke vanished, replaced by a man whose every instinct was to defend. Before he could think, his fist connected with Hargrove's jaw with a sickening crack. The music stopped. A gasp rippled through the crowd. In the stunned silence, Elara was at his side in an instant. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. She placed a hand on his arm, a light, calming touch that felt like a brand. "Lord Hargrove seems to have taken a fall," she announced to the room, her voice clear and carrying. "The champagne, I fear, is particularly potent this year. Your Grace, perhaps we should ensure he finds his carriage." Her cool-headed intervention diffused the scandal. She guided Julian away, her grip firm on his arm. In the carriage home, he was silent, seething with a tumult of emotions he could not name. "Why did you do that?" Elara asked quietly, breaking the silence. "He was a fool, but he was not wrong. It is what we agreed. A business arrangement." Julian turned to her, his composure shattered. "It was not. It is not," he struggled for the words. "He insulted you." "I am quite accustomed to insults. I do not require you to defend my honor, Your Grace. We have a contract." The formality of the title, the reminder of their cold agreement, felt like a physical blow. "Elara," he said, her name a raw plea on his lips. She looked at him, and in the dim light of the carriage, he saw the glimmer of unshed tears in her eyes. "Do not," she whispered, echoing the words she had spoken to her father a lifetime ago. "Do not confuse the variables now." It was the moment he knew. The equation was flawed. He had calculated for everything but the one thing that now threatened to undo him completely. He was falling in love with his wife. The atmosphere at Ashbourne Park upon their return was charged with a new and painful tension. The fragile, professional détente had been shattered. Julian's attempted defense of her honor had thrown the unspoken truth between them into stark relief: their marriage was no longer just a business. He began to seek her out, not for reports, but for her company. He asked her opinion on matters of the heart, what to do about a tenant's doomed love affair, how to counsel a friend entangled in one. He started to show her the hidden parts of the estate, a hidden grotto, a lake where swans nested, the portrait of his mother, a gentle-looking woman who had died when he was young. "She was like you," he said one afternoon as they stood before the painting. "She had a quiet strength. My father broke her spirit with his indifference." Elara's heart ached for the lonely boy he had been. She saw the walls around him crumbling, stone by stone, and she knew she was perilously close to surrendering her own heart completely. The sharp-witted merchant's daughter was being undone by kindness, by glimpses of the wounded man beneath the Duke's icy exterior. The turning point came with a crisis. A fire broke out in one of the tenant cottages. The entire household rushed to help, forming a bucket brigade. In the chaos, Julian saw Elara not directing from a safe distance, but right in the thick of it, her dress smudged with soot, passing buckets alongside the scullery maid, her voice calm and encouraging. When a beam threatened to fall on a young stable boy, it was Julian who lunged forward, shoving the boy to safety and taking a glancing blow to his shoulder. The pain was searing, but it was nothing compared to the terror he saw in Elara's eyes as she rushed to his side. "You fool," she cried, her hands fluttering over his injured shoulder, her composure utterly gone. "You could have been killed." He caught her hand, his own grip tight. "And you," he said, his voice rough with pain and emotion, "are supposed to be a cold, logical business partner. Why are you crying?" A single tear traced a clean path through the soot on her cheek. "Because the variable was miscalculated," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I was not supposed to fall in love with you." There, in the smoky, chaotic night, with the scent of burning timber in the air, Julian Blackwood, the Duke of Ashbourne, looked at his wife and finally let the last of his defenses fall. "The miscalculation was mine," he said, pulling her closer, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. "I thought I could build a life on a foundation of stone. I was a fool. A life needs a heart. My life needs your heart, Elara. I love you." He kissed her then, not as a duty, but as a man starving for the taste of his own salvation. It was a kiss of passion, of promise, of a future reborn. The business arrangement dissolved in that kiss, replaced by the terrifying, glorious, unpredictable reality of a love they had never dared to calculate. 5 years later. Ashbourne Park was no longer a monument to decay, but a beacon of life. The gardens were meticulously kept, the fields were golden with wheat, and the sound of laughter echoed through the halls, most often from a small, energetic boy of 4 with his father's stormy eyes and his mother's clever smile. Elara stood on the terrace, watching her husband, the Duke, being chased by their son, Julian Jr., around the rose bushes. The stern, cold man she had married was gone, replaced by a man who laughed freely and whose love for her was a constant, warm presence in her life. He saw her and broke away from the game, scooping up his squealing son and carrying him towards her. "Your Grace," he said, his eyes warm as they rested on her. "Your son is a tyrant. He demands I abandon all my ducal duties to play pirates. He comes by it honestly," Elara smiled, reaching out to smooth her son's hair. "He has his father's talent for issuing commands." Julian set the boy down, sending him off to find his nanny with a promise of a story later. Then he turned to Elara, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they looked out over their land. "I received a letter from your father today," he said, his chin resting on her head. "The Finch-Ashbourne Consortium is the largest private trading enterprise in England. He credits you, of course." "He credits the connections you provided," she corrected softly, leaning back into his embrace. "No," Julian said, turning her in his arms to face him. His gaze was serious, full of a love that still had the power to steal her breath. "He credits your acumen. As do I. You did not just save my fortune, Elara. You saved me. You taught this old duke that the most valuable asset on any balance sheet is not land or gold, but the heart. He kissed her gently, a slow, tender promise of a lifetime of such kisses. Later that evening, as Julian slept beside her, his arm thrown possessively across her waist, Elara looked at the simple gold band on her finger. It was the same ring from their joyless wedding, but it now symbolized something entirely different. It was no longer a token of a contract, but a seal on a promise, a testament to a love that had been the most profitable, and most unexpected, calculation of their lives. The variable they had dismissed had become the cornerstone of their entire world. And it was, without a doubt, the best investment either of them had ever made.